Broadcasting from the far side of Enceladus, beaming in at the speed of light across the vast chasms of space, streaming directly into your brain, you're listening to episode 33 of the Spartacast League. Joining us today are your hosts, Jazzy Vidalia, that's myself, and Dark Moonpaw. Hey there, Dark. How's it going?
Hey, I'm grand. Surviving, mostly. Trying to enjoy the new decade for like a week and then realizing that it's a new year and the same shit's still happening. But yeah, I'm trying my best.
And it is a new decade, and as the sun sets on the last decade, we enter the new decade as night falls upon the land and the flames of democracy are being smothered by the threat of fascism. The optimism of the new decade has faded as we recover from the hangovers of the new year, only to find that the material conditions that led to the current situation are still looming over us as they had before. Hanging only by a single thread as a continent burns, the world inched closer to world war, and the spectacle continues. In this episode, we're going to discuss how we got here and a path forward. We are going to look back at the beginning of the decade to the Occupy movement and the history of silencing dissent within the United States. But first, we go to Australia, where over 30,000 square miles of wilderness have burned, an area larger than the state of South Carolina or the country of Scotland, in what is the largest outbreaks of wildfires ever recorded.
And it's been terrifying, to say the least. Recent assessments by ecologists at the University of Sydney, if I can recall correctly, have estimated that nearly 500 million animals have been wiped out since these fires even began starting in September for all. And I mean, this has been going on for a long time now. It's not only showcased the lack of willpower of the Australian government to do much about the issue that's been going on for much longer than what the media have even been giving it credit for. I mean, this started a while back, as I've just said. And I mean, the assessment of the damage has only really started now, ever since it's kind of died down. We're estimating it, as I said, over 500 million animals, have died. But some ecologists are even arguing that it's soared over 800 million in New South Wales, and nationally have concluded that it may be over 1 billion. There's nothing really quite to compare with that devastation because it's going on in such a large area so quickly. And it is, again, a very miserable sign of things to come if climate change continues the way it continues to go. The leader of the Liberal Party in Australia, or the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, has essentially tried to defend his leadership and his government's record on climate change very recently, given the fact he has been given a lot of hatred, and a lot of rightful hatred, by the residents of Australia, who have lost over 2,000 homes and the country itself has lost 24 lives to this awful ordeal. No thanks to his government, or no thanks to the governmental leadership within the country, but it was all thanks to the brave firefighters, and members of the local Navy and Air Force, in fact, who were thrown into the battle against the fires, because they wanted to do something about it. Only authorities have only now began to estimate the extent of these damages. And now Morrison has the gall to say, and this was said last week, I believe, there's no time for blame to be thrown around. And now is the time to focus on the responses being made. Blame doesn't help anybody at this time, and over-analysis of these things is not a productive exercise. Which is a very rich thing to say, because Scott Morrison has a very questionable record on climate change, for that matter. Something that he refused to actually admit was causing the problem in the first place, which is why a lot of Australians are actually mad with his government.
Well, it's also because he is in the pocket of the biggest industry in Australia, which is the mining industry. And it is so big because they've been supplying China with coal for the last 20 or 30 years.
Indeed. And this illustrates the point, essentially. He only finally decided to acknowledge the links between the bushfires and climate change itself. There was no actual change in opinion there. This wasn't because Morrison himself actually believes that climate change is a real systematic problem in countries like Australia. In fact, it's just an example of deceit. He specifically had to change that mind, because if he didn't, he would have got more shit from the press and the public, who have already been hammering on the legitimacy of his government for quite a while now, ever since this began. And what we're seeing in Australia, in a country that, in my opinion, that hasn't had the chance to change that much over a very long time. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people in Australia, and a lot of leftists in Australia admit that it's a country that's very, very conservative compared to even a lot of countries in Europe that have conservative governments. And a lot of this is unfortunately because of the ruling party, which is the Liberal Party, which I find hilarious for a name.
Which is not liberal at all. They're
not even sort of, no.
Yeah, they're equivalent to the American Republican Party, to my understanding. Is that correct?
In terms of policy and in terms of political ideology, they are mostly indistinguishable. I mean, there's a reason a large proportion of people who actually vote for the Liberal Party would possess the same generalized belief systems as your regular GOP supporter in America, including the racism, of course. But getting back, to the point of the matter there, it's quite telling in a sense that the climate denialism that has stemmed in Australia and throughout the world, for that matter, has become a significant part of this entire ordeal, as we've noticed, because even while an entire country is literally on fire, with over 2,000 homes being destroyed, with many innocent people losing their lives, and with over 1 billion animals dying in these fires. I mean, this hurts biodiversity, especially, for that matter, in a country that is very, contrary to a lot of popular beliefs, is very, it's very diverse in terms of its biodiversity. And this is very important for our environment, and for the people of Australia even as well. But the climate denialism doesn't take this into account. It has been spreading rampantly throughout the years, and it's only gotten to the point now in which, even while a country is burning, the climate denialists will continue to deny the science and continue to point the finger and say that climate change is just a product of the quote-unquote liberal establishment.
Yeah, it was even such to the point where there was a huge disinformation campaign going on with internet trolls where they were blaming the fires on arsonists. And while some of the fires were indeed started by arsonists, the vast majority of them were not. They were started by lightning storms or other conditions. And they were saying that, it's an arson epidemic. There's over 180 arsonists out there doing it. And it's these leftists that are going out there in the wilderness, trying to prove that climate change is on all these bogus accusations. And even Scott Morrison and a lot of the liberal politicians in Australia were trying to toe that line for a bit before they got caught in the lie.
Absolutely. And again, this was all because of the pressure that was exerted onto Morrison's government by the people of Australia, because they are rightfully, a very large proportion of them for that matter, are rightfully upset. I mean, he couldn't even go into a town and not get heckled to death because of how poorly the government managed this situation. This isn't surprising for a country like Australia as well. I mean, a lot of this is part of the media in the country too. Research has recently shown, in fact, that climate skepticism within Australia gets a substantial amount of exposure. I mean, as a result of this, Ipsos findings, which is a polling service essentially, it has found that Australia lags behind other nations in acknowledging the threat of climate change.
And like I said, why is that? Where's the money at that's funding all of that disinformation? It's from the mining companies there that have a huge stake in Australian politics, because just like any other bourgeois democracy, it is the capitalists that control the political parties, control the politics there, and control the media and the message.
No, indeed. And again, this is the thing. I do think it's unfair to whoever suggests that the denialism simply spreads from a country like Australia, which is what I will admit this article has kind of given off an impression, although it has accurately shown the pollings that I've suggested. I will say that the denialism doesn't simply stem from one place, which I think is important for people to note. The denialism spreads from essentially right-wing think tanks that people have been giving platforms for the past decade. We're seeing a surge in anti-scientific rhetoric that ignores truth, that ignores the scale of the damage, and simply looks for another scapegoat. And as you said there, because 4chan image boards have literally tried to blame it, have literally tried to point the finger and say, oh no, it wasn't climate change, it was just brown people. It's quite telling in a way that they know that it's real. They know the bullshit of their arguments, but it doesn't matter to them because at the end of the day, as long as pure ideology is perpetuated in a way that is consistent with their own belief systems, they themselves will do whatever they can to ensure that the narrative is swinged into their favor.
Well, their tactic is basically they put out these big lies here in hopes that people will repeat them. People that are probably ignorant of the situation. So, so a conservative having lunch with another conservative says at lunch, hey, I heard that all these fires in Australia were started by Aboriginal arsonists. What you were saying about right-wing think tanks is that, yeah, a lot of this does come from right-wing think tanks. Their research comes out of bias organizations such as the Rand Institute, the Cato Institute, the Federalist Society, Heartland Institute, and whatnot. And of course, we also see just totally unsubstantiated rumors being boosted from Breitbart and InfoWars that just ultimately have their start on 4chan, which and they are just as dangerous as these right-wing think tanks because of their ability to propagate rumors.
I don't believe it's just because of their ability to propagate, though. I also believe that it is due to their ability to take advantage of the resources that the present establishment has given them. I mean, the biggest of these resources, in my opinion, for the majority of climate denialism that I hear, at least on a regular basis, a lot of it stems from YouTube, which in my opinion is one of the biggest far-right propaganda machines that have ever been built, in a way. When we look at how many people use YouTube on a daily basis, when we look at how the algorithm is designed in a way to cater to right-wing propaganda.
You could literally go onto YouTube, watch a few YouTube gaming videos, like Raocow or whatever, and the next thing you know,
and then you'll get to hear a 2-hour rant about why women are ruining video games, for example.
Exactly.
I mean, we've all seen it.
It's definitely a concerted choice on the admins at YouTube. They know what's going on. They're not dumb. They're not stupid. They can see what is going on. And it's obvious to anybody that signs up with a fresh account, you could try this experiment yourself and see how far you are to getting to Jordan Peterson. And pretty much, if you do anything video game related, you're going to stumble on him somehow, or one of his many cohorts, Carl of Sargon of Assad, or whatever his name is. I don't fucking know. But yeah.
Well, look, you don't
is
fucking
it Carl
have
of Swindon, right? Yeah. That's who he is.
And I think you make an important point there in terms of the algorithm as well. But I do also believe that, when it comes from this kind of denialism, it is not just a matter of the algorithm, which I think a lot of data analysts have pointed out quite well. It also stems from YouTube's ability to create an intimate social network, if you will, between creators and their target audience. This works in a lot of different ways. This is because influencers can have a direct incentive, if you will, to collaborate, as it gives them new exposure to different audiences and helps them to provide programming material, essentially. It also means that ideas and viewership can quickly slide between different creators and channels in turn. So it's almost like a big network between a lot of right-wing propagandists. I mean, why else would you think a lot of them co-host different things? I mean, this is very common. In fact, you see that a lot, even amongst alt-righters on YouTube. They stream a lot together, in fact. I mean, whether it's doing something simple like video games even, or spreading their usual bollocks.
Yeah, you're exactly right on that. And also there's a phenomena called parasocial relationships that spring forth from things like radio shows, even like what we do, where because of the medium involved, people do feel like they become invested in whatever media that they are consuming. They feel that they kind of get to know that person. And so they develop an emotional relationship that is one way with them. And I've seen this with a lot of right-wing radio hosts, that people get really emotional when you start criticizing their favorite radio host, whether it be Rush Limbaugh, Michael Weiner, or
Wait. His
What?
surname's Wiener.
His surname is Wiener. It's what's really funny. His real name is actually Michael Savage, because Savage is far more manly sounding than Wiener. But yeah,
I thought it would have been. I thought it would have been Dick or something,
yeah,
or
it's
Dickard. I don't know.
yeah. So like his stage name is Michael Savage. His real name is Michael Wiener. Yeah, he's kind of a really angry old boomer,
An angry
type.
old
Yeah,
man.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
A lot
I
of
will
those.
say.
But they develop what are called parasocial relationships with their audience, where the audience feels emotionally invested with that person or with that show, and that creates a one-way bond where people feel that they have some sort of obligation or whatever to, spread the word. And it
And there's a
becomes,
reason,
yeah,
and there's a reason why it becomes so extreme. It's almost like a rabbit hole in a way. Well, it
exactly.
is. It's a pipeline. I mean, many of us have talked about the pipeline before, and obviously there's many different methodologies to the same pipeline. Do not get me wrong, but
Oh, definitely.
simultaneously,
Alex Jones was a master at creating this pipeline, and it's one of the reasons why the political scene is the way it is now. You can actually go back and look at the formation of and spread of InfoWars and its effect on the body politic and the language that we use today, just because of how dedicated its audience was to sneaking in those little memes, if you will, into the political language and getting people to talk about things in the direction that they want them to. Or even if it wasn't like the end goal that they were always talking about, Alex was always pushing people towards that. First, it was, like 9/11's an inside job, conspiracies. And then all of a sudden we get bam to 2008. And he's talking about Obama and him being an illegitimate president because of this or that reason, not born in the U.S. or whatever. And then we get a little bit further down the line to 2012, and the movement's just totally different.
absolutely.
Everything got transformed to this really extreme right-wing movement over a long period of time.
And the insidious nature of it was the fact that it was able to take a platform that was originally used, in my own opinion, it was originally used by a lot of people who were quite vulnerable at the time, who were quite lonely, and it managed to turn a lot of young men, I mean, of course, as we all know, into murderers, essentially. And this is what happened, last year. I mean, it happened throughout the decade. If there's any foreshadowing of what is to come, I do think that this pipeline will only become more and more apparent to those who are still not aware of it, or for those who, in my opinion, willfully refuse to acknowledge that it exists and that YouTube plays a significant role as a result of its corporate culture in that
YouTube
particular
plays
pipeline.
a part in it, and also there is a grassroots element to this with the right, especially within 4chan and other websites where they are creating the propaganda themselves, and they're very effective at it. And one of the reasons that they're so effective at it is because they've studied psychological warfare. They know what they're doing. They've read like Pentagon and Army manuals on how to do this stuff, and they're implementing it. That's what they're doing. So like when you go on Twitter and all of a sudden one day you see a bunch of, Jewish accounts or Jewish looking accounts out there start tweeting horribly racist things aimed at African Americans, and then are like, well, what's this? And you find out, they're not actually Jewish people. Surprise! It's a bunch of kids on 4chan that have created these fake accounts, and they're trying to get blacks to go after Jews and Jews to go after blacks and keep us fighting amongst ourselves, infighting on the left, infighting within society, while they slowly take over the rhetoric and dialogue in this country and around the world.
And the pipeline itself, again, it didn't just apply to that kind of right-wing violence. It applies to climate denialism especially, which is what I'm trying to say. 1 minute somebody's watching Stevie Crowder talk about, I mean, I'm calling him Stevie on purpose, folks. 1 minute you're listening to him talk about how the ice caps aren't melting, and then before you know it, you're going on to watch videos about how Greta Thunberg is actually a Jewish conspiracy. And like, For someone who got so much hate as well throughout the past few years, mind you, a lot of hideous hate for being an autistic girl who has went out of her way, in my opinion. I mean, I don't agree with everything she's said. Obviously, I don't agree with everything she's done, but I also think that the absolute array of hatred she has received for being simply autistic exemplifies that pipeline perfectly, because it again highlights how 1 minute you're denying climate change, and then the next minute you're literally demonizing autistic people as a group, combined with climate denialism as a whole. And I mean, this ties in very well to, the state apparatus as well, in terms of its, ability to also play a huge role in that climate denialism, whether it's through the use of media in giving such propagandists a significant platform, or it's through the use of designating liberal movements as terrorist organizations, which in the United Kingdom, we've very recently seen the counterterrorism police have actually placed Extinction Rebellion on a list of extremist ideologies.
Can I just say, I already knew this was going to happen. It was so obvious, and it was also obvious that they were Extinction Rebellion, in my opinion, was working very close with the police. I think closer than a lot of people understand or know, because one of the ops that Extinction Rebellion wanted to do like about 6 months ago or so was this like cult red-handed thing where they were going to use spray chalk to spray like an imprint of their hands on a wall and use red chalk to do it, and then turn themselves into police for vandalism. Well, hey, guess what? If you participated in that, I got news for you. The police know who you are, they know where you live, and they know you're a climate activist, and now they know that you're part of a terrorist organization. So you got played if you did any of that. And it was right then and there that I was like, okay, there's something wrong with Extinction Rebellion, that there's something wrong here. And I have a feeling that this kind of was a bit of an op based off of their tactics and everything, because they're not a revolutionary movement. They are a very liberal movement doing very liberal things. Like they weren't going in it from a materialist perspective. They weren't going in it from like, how can we disrupt things? They were looking at it from, oh, how could we be civil about this?
And it's hilarious because, I mean, this is like some people are probably still scratching their heads thinking that this actually isn't a thing, but I am genuinely not joking. Extinction Rebellion are apparently on the same official government documents as neo-Nazi organizations like Generation Identity. And it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. But it's not surprising because, again, because liberalism itself, or at least liberal tactics for that matter, because I do think, again, I do think a lot of people on the left have been very harsh on Extinction Rebellion in places, because I think at the end of the day, I think a lot of the stuff they have done has been very good, even though they have done some very stupid things. But I do also think that without their movement, I do think that a lot of leftists wouldn't be able to steer a lot of young liberals into a more positive direction in tackling climate change as a whole. But simultaneously, it's unsurprising because liberal ideology works closely with the establishment to the point in which it allows the establishment to essentially kick it in the balls and to say, yeah, you were playing by the rules, but we don't give a shit if you play by the rules. We don't care. And that's the point. The police within this country, they didn't care. And in fact, we all saw how poorly Extinction Rebellion protesters have been treated by the police in the UK for the past while. And all the police have had to say about the protest is, oh, well, they've cost us tens of millions of pounds and have diverted officers from crime fighting. Yeah, but that's not the point of the matter. They at the end of the day, the establishment are using them as an example. They're basically trying to say that even if you follow the rules, we're still not going to fucking listen to you. And that's the point. You can't follow the rules.
Right. And even if you follow the rules, they're still going to blame you because the police went out and said, well, because you protested, we had to divert millions of dollars. And, maybe somebody that was hurt, we couldn't get to or whatever. It's ridiculous. Any any dissent will be cracked down on, pretty much. Like that's what people need to understand. We've seen it so many times, whether it's in the United States, whether it is in Great Britain, whether it's in Australia. I mean, it's just how the capitalists operate. It's how bourgeois democracy operates. There are a subset of things that are tolerated and a subset of things that aren't. And the subset of things that aren't tolerated get smaller and smaller every day.
To me, the actual demonization of the group comes very suspiciously in close unison to the recent elections that took place in the UK with with obviously the election of another 5-year conservative government, because again, apparently we loved the previous one so much, we're going to have another one.
You had mentioned that Scott Morrison was actually ran out of a village that he was visiting to do a photo op with and shake hands with people, take nice pictures and everything. And they pretty much told him to fuck off. And
oh no, not just the people, but the firefighters as well. I mean,
everybody.
There are people do not like Scott Morrison, and I think at the end of the day, he's on damage control.
But it's kind of funny that you had mentioned that, because there's a similar analogy to something that happened a few months ago in the United Kingdom with Boris Johnson. He was out visiting.
Not just in certain places, but Sheffield. I think Sheffield was one example where he got ran out. I mean, so he shakes the guy's hand. The guy says, "Please leave my town," and then he says, "I will soon enough." And it's an interesting analogy because it highlights how, again, the establishment don't like actually sitting down and talking to ordinary people when they fuck up majorly. And that's the point of the matter. I mean, Australia is just one major example of that. And I think, again, if anything good is to come of the absolute array of disasters that have occurred over there recently, I do think that leftists in Australia should take advantage of the fact that there's a fracture in the political climate at this rate. The legitimacy of the present government has been challenged. And now it is your duty, and the duty of all of us for that matter, to take on the responsibility of telling the truth that these people don't want to tell. To take advantage of the fact that their legitimacy is on fire as the smoke itself chokes the country.
The truth is, it's hard. It's something that nobody wants to hear, because things are very bad right now in Australia, throughout the world. And there's no easy fix. If anybody comes along and tells you that there's an easy fix, they're lying. There's a lot of work to be done, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in the United States, whether it's on the periphery in the third world. There is a lot of work to be done to fix the ills of capitalism, to fix the ills of climate change, which is going to claim a lot of lives, even if we act now. We have entered a point where it is too late for some, and we have to understand that.
What is needed to be done is that people need to realize that things cannot just happen at once, but that's why we must take the chances we're given and do what we can with those chances, because at the end of the day, we won't often get a chance like this again to make a difference for the better of everybody else. And a lot of people I know didn't think Australia was capable of change for quite some time, because again, it's a very, very conservative country with a lot of very poor decisions by its own government. But now that its government has been exposed for essentially the hacks they've always been, the left have now been presented with the opportunity over there to take advantage of the situation in a way that allows people to see the truth of the matter, to understand that people like Morrison are just an example of a much bigger and harsher problem on our own society, really, for that matter. At the end of the day, it might be the start of something new for the country, and I do think that at best that's a good sign, maybe. Even out of something that was very awful, there is a sign potentially that things can change in Australia for the better, and that maybe the rampant climate denialism that has taken place there is just one illustration of that product.
And yeah, as we do enter the next decade, we do have a lot of opportunity here for a course correction, and it's going to take a large movement to do that. Here in the United States, about a decade ago, just a little less actually, we had a movement called Occupy Wall Street that was really large for a couple years and just kind of fizzled out. And what it was is that people went out and occupied their town squares, occupied the streets, and even occupied literally Wall Street at one point. That they set up a tent city in Zuccotti Park on Wall Street. And
which became quite an iconic image.
Yes, it became an iconic image because of how it ended, actually, which is with the police rolling in to remove the tent city, and then we really never heard much about Occupy again after that. It was a huge failure, a huge disappointment, and it was something that demoralized the left in the United States. In my opinion, for almost, I think that we're still suffering from it, that we really haven't recovered. Arguably, you could say that, like, with the resurgence of Antifa, that we've recovered there. But, like, I would argue that we haven't. That ever since, really, the Patriot Act was established and the U.S. started going after anti-war protesters and going after environmental protesters, that at that point the left kind of died for a long time in the United States.
And just to confirm for the people who don't know, would you mind maybe explaining in detail the intricacies of the Patriot Act and how that would have led to a lot of the problems we eventually saw with the Occupy movement?
Yeah, so the Patriot Act was, of course, signed after 9/11 occurred, and it was a huge, huge body of law that covered everything from finance down to law enforcement and everything else. Created all these reporting systems for reporting terrorism, except they had a very broad definition of what terrorism is. And pretty much every industry got their hands on the Patriot Act and decided what would be defined as terrorism. And so one of the things, for instance, that got rolled into the Patriot Act as part of enforcement was things like economic terrorism, the concept that if you go after companies, if you try to obtain information from companies, that in and of itself was considered terrorism because it would cause harm to those companies. Not harm to the country even, just harm to the countries. And they would consider that a form of corporate or economic terrorism. It's where ag-gag laws, so laws silencing environmental researchers that were looking into the effects of agricultural sites like slaughterhouses and stuff like that on the local environment. A lot of those people got silenced. There was a point where you couldn't even take water samples downstream from a slaughterhouse or agricultural facility because they would say that the chemicals in that water are their property and are not to be analyzed because they are proprietary, and that by analyzing them, you are revealing company secrets, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, downstream, there are people whose children are sick, families are dying in these small towns, and they don't know why, but it's pretty fucking obvious why. And it's because also the U.S. government at that time had just rolled back a ton of environmental regulations as well, and they were putting all sorts of things into the environment. That's really...
And all in all, why do you think this ties in especially to the Occupy movement then?
All of these systems that were created through the Patriot Act were used against people within the Occupy movement to spy on them. Police actually harassed leaders of Occupy, even to the point where a few of those leaders actually committed suicide, and that's on record. We also saw a similar pattern with BLM, if you're familiar with that, where most of the big leaders that participated in BLM in the Ferguson riots are all dead.
Oh yes, yep,
And they
definitely.
all died the
And
same.
we saw that a lot the
eh,
same way. Yeah.
Yeah, they all died pretty much the same way, in their cars shot to death.
So the history goes back, in other words, is what you're
The history
basically
goes
pointing out.
back, and it has a lot of parallels with other operations in the United States. And the United States has a huge history of silencing dissent. This isn't something that's modern. This isn't something that was created under Donald Trump. This is something that's been going on really since the inception of the United States. A lot of people don't realize that one of the biggest crackdowns of free speech in the United States actually began just a few years into the United States history with the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were signed in 1798. So just as the ink of the Constitution has dried, they are going after dissidents in the United States who only wanted a new party. That's pretty much all they wanted in the United States, and that's what they were going after. The Alien and Sedition Acts were put into place because of the Quasi-War, supposedly, and they was to go after French sympathizers. However, there was a brand new party that was just being started by a Mr. Thomas Jefferson, if you will. Names probably ring a bell, right? One of our founding fathers, right? So Thomas Jefferson created the Democratic Republican Party, which is the modern day Democratic Party. And the Alien and Sedition Acts were written such that any criticism of the United States government would be seen as a violation of it. And therefore, what the party was doing, since the Federalist Party at the time was seen as essentially an extension of the government and government policy, they looked at these people as attacking the government, and they jailed tens of thousands of people that were members of this new party. They had riots and rebellions in the state of Kentucky. They had protests that filled up town squares in the Carolinas and in Virginia.
I can feel the free speech warriors in their chairs just sweating right now.
Exactly. And this was early America, land of the free, where you could ostensibly say anything you like, but here we are. We have founding fathers advocating to throw other founding fathers in prison for life.
And when you explain it like that, it puts things into perspective in a way, because again, there's still a very large proportion of people out there who still defend the United States for being this supposed barren of freedom. And now a lot of those people are probably asking themselves, as the sketch has always been said, are we the baddies? This is the point. The United States was never a beacon of freedom, especially of freedom of speech. It was never a beacon of freedom, it's always censored.
Because there's always been people that were under subjugation within the United States to some degree. It was obvious back then that African Americans, women, even non-propertied white working class people, like, they weren't even allowed to vote. The only people allowed to vote during the very early period of America were white land-owning men over the age of 21. That was the only people that were allowed to vote. And over time, it was a long, hard fight to extend that circle.
And on that particular note, we've obviously pointed out, I hope, to a lot of the free speech warriors. Well, they call themselves that, but anyway.
Well, the thing
we've pointed out to a lot of people who
that's just like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to silencing free speech. We have the Espionage Act of 1917 and 18, which pretty much made it illegal to criticize the government for anything during World War I. They would just throw you in jail, and you did not want to go to jail for espionage in World War I or sedition, because it was really bad. They actually jailed a Husserite from North Dakota because he refused to participate in the war due to religious beliefs. The Hussarites are pacifists.
Yep.
And they shipped him down from North Dakota, put him in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. No, they told him the only clothes that you will get is this Army uniform, and you will put it on. He refused to put on the Army uniform. He died of exposure in his cell. And then what happened next is so egregious that it is almost hard to conceive and hard to believe. The United States government shipped his family to Fort Leavenworth to visit him and to confirm his body. When they had his family identify him, they had placed him in the Army uniform and they buried him in it.
Charming. But the point you're making is
and the
thus,
U.S. government did things even worse.
Even worse, yes. We'll
to African Americans during World War I, when they decided they didn't. When some of those people decided they didn't want to go. Anybody that was part of the IWW, anybody that was a socialist, those people were put in prison. Eugene V. Debs famously ran his presidential campaign from prison. And then we move on and we look at the 40s. We have the Smith Act, and then we have the Mccarran Security Act, if I recall correctly. Both similar laws, essentially saying that if you speak out against the government, if you advocate for new systems, i.e. socialism or communism, you have to register yourself with the government. And if you refuse to register, every day that you're not registered, you get fined. You can be put in prison for 5 years. The Mccarran Act is famous because if you were registered as a communist, you couldn't get a federal job. You couldn't get many state jobs either because they wouldn't hire you. So if you were a teacher or anything like that, you were out of luck. And then, of course, we have the more covert stuff, the stuff that is of conspiracy infamy. And that is Project Mockingbird, where the Pentagon literally worked with news organizations to create and write the news. Not just push a narrative, but literally we're giving Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite the talking points in news scripts that they were going to read on television. You know, the most trusted name in news, Walter Cronkite. And this lasted.
And what's changed in that regard? Let's be fair here.
Of course, yeah. We ask, like, what has changed? Well, they can't do it overtly now. Now they do it more covertly, and they do it more in a beneficial manner. They're like, hey, if I see you guys, you're producing a movie over there, and we would really like it if you pushed our narrative. We'll give you some tanks for your movie if you push our narrative. Also, we want to see the script of that movie because we might want to make some adjustments. We'll help you make it more real. And also inject some of those talking points in too.
Oh well, we've seen that a lot with the U.S. Army and its manipulation of movies for that matter. A lot of movies and even shows for that matter have a lot of pro-US talking points in them.
Oh, definitely, and that goes back to Mockingbird. Like it's a big there's a lot of history there, and then of course we have the even more covert stuff with MK Ultra, where they used drugs to drug up activists and stuff like that, get them to look crazy and try to discredit them. And, of course, COINTELPRO, where they just wholesale went on disinformation campaigns, campaigns to infiltrate. If you don't know about COINTELPRO, you need to look that shit up because that shit is still going on to this day. You can see the information warfare on Twitter, on social media.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And the tactics, even if it's not even the government doing it, they're still there. We see a lot of, like 4chan, using classical COINTELPRO psychological operations like we had talked about earlier. And it's important that we familiarize and inoculate ourselves against these. Go out there, look up psychological warfare operation manuals from the Army. Read them, understand them, know what you're looking at, and be able to identify it when you see it. And
there's a reason we ourselves have been able to see through a lot of the talking points in the first place, because we know where that manipulation stems from in the first place. You know what I mean?
Right. And this is all how the U.S. government has stifled free speech and has went after movements, whether it be the Occupy Wall Street movement, whether it be the Black Panthers, whether it be the IWW, whether it be anything. The U.S. government has a vast history in tracking down, destroying, and discrediting movements that are designed by the grassroots, by the working class, to help out the working class, to help out each other. And they have a history of going in and tearing these organizations apart for the benefit of the wealthy in this country.
And this ties in again to a lot of our suggestions, which we'll get to, but we still need to tackle the main question, obviously, because now that we've pointed out, obviously, the history of the United States in suppressing movements and freedom of speech, well, the freedom of speech that they don't benefit from. The main question, of course, I'd imagine people may be thinking now is,
where do we go
why
from
did
here?
It fail? Well, not even that. Why did it fail?
Why did it fail? And the answer is that Occupy was very disorganized. It was very easy to break them up. And also, it covered a very small scope of things in reality. And on top of that, like, the messaging with Occupy was very poor. 10 years later, if you ask somebody about Occupy and if they remember what it's about, they probably couldn't tell you much other than it was a bunch of people that were upset that a bunch of people were getting rich on Wall Street while everybody else was out of jobs. And so a bunch of people went with tents and camped out on Wall Street. That's about pretty much all most people remember. And to be fair, that's what's recorded in our oral history, our colloquial history.
And we're seeing similarities in those kind of difficulties with XR, in my opinion, Extinction Rebellion, for that matter. There's similarities in a way, in my opinion, between the Occupy movement in terms of the failings of liberalism and some of the difficulties Extinction Rebellion are facing now. And my fear is that what if XR becomes the same thing? What if that falls into the same trap that Occupy has fallen into, because they've failed to learn from the failings of the Occupy movement, for that matter. Even now we're seeing, the same mistakes being made, by blatantly cooperating with law enforcement and by sending a very vague message in places, even with some of the more clear messages, there's still that vagueness that causes a lot of people to react more with confusion rather than with complete trust, for that matter.
There is, and then there's also a very... Extinction Rebellion and Occupy Wall Street had very singular tactics in terms of what they did and how they operated. They weren't very agile or modular, so you couldn't take part of the Occupy Wall Street movement away and still have it completely function. And that is something that needs to be focused on for any healthy, large movement that plans to actually do anything, is that you need to have it to where different parts work together. And if one part is removed from the equation, the other parts can fill the gaps. And so while civil disobedience is great and all, the problem comes, well, okay, so everybody gets arrested or moves on, and then that's it. There's no revolutionary process involved in kicking it forward to the next step.
There's no backbone almost in
right.
All of them.
There's no backbone to it. So the entire thing collapses. And so any new movement, it's going to need modules, parts of it that can be removed, segments of it working in tandem with each other. And so one of the things that's very important this year, if we want to get a movement off the ground, we have to build up workers' unions. That is strategically important, whether it's just a corporate union through the CWA or through the Teamsters or AFL-CIO, or a revolutionary union like the one that I belong to, which is the IWW, Industrial Workers of the World, which is my favorite, and I recommend that if you've not checked it out, go check it out. If you're not a member, join. If there's not a chapter in your area, start one. Then the second thing that we need to do
they're very, and just to interrupt, there's, they're very helpful with actually helping you develop a chapter if you need to. I know because, I'm in the UK branch, obviously, but from my experience, they're very helpful in aiding all members, especially those who wish to start a chapter.
You didn't tell me you were wobbly.
I am. I've been a wobbly for a year.
I'm going to have to check your red card. I'm going to have to make sure you're on top of them dues there. No, I'm just messing with you.
Well, ours is a little different. Yeah. Ours is like a red plastic card. Actually, people say
I got the old book, but we're going to be switching to the red. We're going to be switching to the red card pretty soon. But I do have the old book. I'm going to keep the old book because.
Well, does that make me more modern?
It does make you more modern, but I'm not keep my old book just in a collection because I have a feeling that's going to be memorabilia. I have a bit of a nostalgia for that thing even now. There's something about it. It's a callback to the days in which like labor actually had power, and I love looking at that little thing. I keep it on my desk. I keep it in my wallet wherever I go, and I use it like as like I look at it when I'm feeling bad and, feeling down about, how things are, because I realize, like it is through us as a working class that we're going to make things better. And so looking at that, it gives me hope. The other important thing that we have to do on top of union membership, we have to have a militia or vanguard in place. I know a lot of anarchists already checked out when I said vanguard. You know what? I'm sorry. So we'll just use the word militia. How's that sound? But the purpose of the militia, and the reason I use the term vanguard, is that whether it be a red army, whether it
vanguardism is a very broad term anyway.
Right. So whether it be a militia with just your friends, or a red army vanguard, or whatever it is that you want to create, or whatever it is that you have in your mind, you have to understand that once you put those uniforms on, once you bring out the flags, once you are walking down the street or whatever, and you have that look to you, that people know what you are, you better be out there serving the people. I take that line to heart. I know that's a Mao thing. I think that's actually one of the best tenets of Maoism, because if we just go out there with guns looking like we're about to shoot somebody up, like we're going to look just like
people are going to shit themselves.
Yeah, people are going to shit themselves. So the thing is that if you're going to form a militia or vanguard, you better be out there serving the people first before you're out there training.
Absolutely.
Make that part of your training. Make getting out there, doing something good for your community and letting people know who you are and what you're about something. Because if you do, people will want to join. Mm-hmm. If people understand what you're doing, they will want to join, and they will be interested in what your ideology is. But if all you do is go out there and look like you're ready to shoot up a school, people are going to call 911 on you. People are going to call the cops on you. Don't do that. But it is important that we do build up these militias and vanguards, because in the event of any major movement, the government is going to attack. And if it's not the government, they're going to get their lapdogs, the Proud Boys or whomever out there, and they're going to attack us. And it's only a matter of time.
Well, it's not a matter of timing. It's already happening. It's been happening for ages. It's only going to get worse.
The Proud Boys have shown up on people's doorsteps. There was a woman that was literally harassed at her doorstep by a Proud Boy and by two Proud Boys that tracked her down in Philadelphia.
And it's the same in the UK. I mean, we're seeing a resurgence in far-right politics, particularly with regards to even awful groups like the EDL, which used to be ran by the infamous Tommy Robinson, obviously. And I mean, we're seeing a growth in them as well. You know, they're feeling empowered, not just because of the election of our own meme, essentially, but also again because the state doesn't necessarily care as much about the violence they commit against its own people, as long as they serve the interests of the state.
Yeah, so in addition to, like we said, building up union membership so that we can actually strike and have even general strikes in the future at some point, we do need a militia or vanguard to be able to defend ourselves. And one of the easiest ways to get that started, to get the training in, is to join an organization like the SRA, the Socialist Rifle Association, and get the gun training in. But also, if you're going to do that, like I said, remember, serve the people. Go out there, serve them first in uniform or whatever, to make sure that they know who you are and what you're about. Because if you fuck up that message, you have fucked up. And I think, honestly, Antifa fucked it up the first time. We can't afford
the first time.
We can't afford to fuck it up a second time. Our
Definitely
lives
not.
are on the line. As a trans woman myself, I know my life is on the line here. And pretty soon, I'm going to be transitioning. And I'll be honest, I don't feel safe. I live in a very liberal community, and I still don't feel safe. And I live in a community where conservatives can blend in fairly easy because, well, there's a lot of liberals here. There's a lot of queer people here too. They know how to emulate, and they emulate good. And I realize that that's a huge threat.
And the truth is, a lot of us need to realize that, we're not safe. We never were safe. And the truth is, I think some people have really underestimated especially a lot of leftists. I think a lot of leftists have underestimated the actual, extent of the damage that has been occurring. I don't think people truly understand how at risk anybody is simply for being a leftist in a lot of cases, in fact. And I know this might sound hilarious to a lot of people, but the truth of the matter is, it isn't uncommon for people. I mean, in the UK, even, Labour politicians have been murdered simply for being members of Labour. Joe Cox was an infamous example of that, who was killed by some far-right thug. And again, it's only going to escalate. And I think this decade, it's an omen almost. To me, personally, I think this decade will be defined as one that's going to have more violence than what we could have possibly imagined before. And that is why the left itself must be more prepared, more vigilant, and be ready to adapt. It's the key word there.
And we have to be ready to adapt fast, because shit's about to hit the fan. And we see it right now coming down the line. And the thing is, you're not going to know until it's too late.
Yep.
So you better be prepared. And we're not prepared now. The best time to start getting prepared is now. Yes, it would have been great if we were prepared 5 or 10 years ago, but we weren't. We didn't know what was coming, or we underestimated. We underestimated a lot. A lot of you guys were too young. Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Boomer.
I'm sorry, but a lot of us were asleep. A lot of us didn't want to be involved anymore. That was me. And a lot of us were just simply tired. Also me. And I'm still tired. But you know what? I realized that my life,
you're older than me anyway.
My life, my friends are in danger. I'm gonna stand up and do something. I'm not gonna go out. I'm not gonna let them win. And so the question is, well, what can we do? So we build everything up. We prepare. We train. We engage in creating community networks first to make sure that we're able to create and receive supplies in some form or another. And then what do we do when we start it? So let's fast forward. Okay, we're going to say it is November 2020. It is Thanksgiving's coming up. You have Black Friday. And there have been rumblings of a mass boycott and strike beginning on Black Friday, targeting retail institutions. People have begun on Thursday evening to blockade retail store entrances and parking lots. Employees are just not going to show up to work tomorrow at major retailers, including Walmart, most of the mall, etc. All of a sudden, we got a big retail strike on our hands.
Mm-hmm.
How do we support that? Well, we support that by not crossing the picket line. So us, as shoppers, as consumers, we hold off. We say, no, you know what? This is madness. You know what? Every fucking year, I spend thousands of dollars on my family to do this. I end up in credit card debt. I haven't even paid off the last Christmas. That's where a lot of families are. That's where a lot of families were this year. How many families out there haven't paid their credit card debt from Christmas last year that they're withholding? There's quite a few. And
it's funny because, again, like Trump's main argument for his legitimacy, even though he's still shitting himself over this entire impeachment process, is that the economy is
That the
growing.
economy
It's
is
soaring.
growing. It's great. It's amazing. We just hit 29,000 on the stock market. Isn't it wonderful? It's not wonderful. It's not wonderful because it's wonderful for the shareholders. It's not wonderful for us. They're getting that money from us. They're getting that money from paying the average full-time worker less than $18,000 a year. A good majority of full-time workers in a new study turns out, on average, are making a lot less than you think they are. I believe that the article cited, it's not in the notes here, but there was one article that was done. It was where some people did a study and found out that a shocking number of full-time workers make less than $18,000 a year in the United States. And we already know about 60% of the country or so lives paycheck to paycheck. They miss one paycheck, they're out. They're out of the game. And families can't afford $1,000 emergency. There's all these statistics that show just how fragile everything is right now. That even the slightest disaster, a loss of a job, a kid getting sick, you getting sick, a car emergency, your brakes going, bad or whatever, the engine block failing, just whatever. Any emergency that costs money or that could cost your job could put you out on the street within a month or two. That is where most Americans are.
Yeah.
And
it's becoming that way over here, especially, with a crumbling health service, with a crumbling with a crumbling labor sector, with stagnating wages. I mean, the average British person is honestly really poorly they're really poorly. They're not well off. They're terribly.
Right.
They're dealing pretty badly as well. I mean, probably not as bad as over there if we had to make comparisons, but
and the capitalist,
from one of the most wealthy countries in the world, we're doing fucking poorly, and it's not going to get any better.
And the capitalist establishment would have you believe that everything is perfect, everything's fine, and things have never been better.
That's always the argument.
You have an iPhone. Shut up. That's what they tell you. They tell you you have a refrigerator to keep your food. You have a microwave. Your life's great,
Or the World Bank. Yeah. The World Bank said that poverty's going down globally. That means that people are just well off now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because this chart told me.
And they don't tell you what the actual statistics are. They just throw some numbers in your face. Say, oh, well, it's good in these places now. Don't worry about it. Instead of actually analyzing the conditions of those places in detail, where you find out the fine print is, well, actually what they consider poverty is deep poverty of less than like $2 a day. The thing is that if we want a movement in this country, like I said, it has to be modular, and we're looking at it. So like we look at it and we say, okay, what's the first thing that could be done? Well, November, striking and boycotting of retail establishments during Black Friday up until Christmas. That would be phase 1. Then on phase 2, remember how I was talking about that debt? Phase 2, January, debt strike. There you go. Don't pay credit cards, loans, student debts, medical debts, you name it. Just don't do it.
Fuck the debts.
Fuck the debts. So phase 3, Operation Occupation. So, hey, this is where we occupy stuff. So what we're talking about here, we're talking about a mass tenant strike. So assist tenants facing eviction through any means necessary. We refuse to pay rent. There you go. Also set up, camps and stuff like that for homeless people, etc. Get homeless people into whatever. You be creative with this. I'm just kind of laying out some ideas here. Then we move on to phase 4. So how do we ratchet it up from there? Where do we go? Well, let's have a general strike. Why not? Let's find an industry to just general strike in, a mass labor strike. If we can do it. Maybe we can't by then. We got a lot of work to do in there. So, okay, we don't do that. Let's scratch that. Then phase 5. Okay, so we move on to phase 5. Tax strike. Deprive the federal government of revenue to ensure enforcement cannot be funded. There you go. And the thing is all of this stuff sounds extremely difficult. And it is extreme. It's extremely difficult. But the thing is, these are modular movements. You take one out, you can place something else in its place.
They're all part of a common foundation.
Right, but they're all part of that common foundation. They're all different ways in which different groups can work to build solidarity as well. So you don't have to have every group or every part of it working on every part of it. You just have a group here, group there, and they do what they want. But the other thing is, for this to be effective, it doesn't have to take a lot of people. You're just talking effectively maybe get 3 to 5% of the country to participate in this. And all of a sudden, these corporations have lost millions, if not billions of dollars over a period of 2 fiscal quarters. So quarter 4 of 2020 and quarter 1 of 2021. And the thing that makes the retail strike so effective, that's retail's strongest quarter. You kill that, you kill their fiscal year. And the thing is if you're worried about, oh, well, this is going to create a recession. Well, the thing is, well, we already talked about the great stock market numbers. Hey, that recession that's not happening right now, you know, that bull market out there that's great. Hey, you ain't part of it. And you will not be part of it. It's like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you're not in it. And it's the same club that they used to beat you over the head with. My favorite,
and I think this is the
favorite Carlin skit, by the way. I'm sorry.
Really?
One of them, yeah.
But I think, the point you've made there still stands in a way. Again, I think the left needs to collectively realize this themselves, that you don't have to have every single person in a country, especially a country that doesn't really want social progress, if you really think about it. Because again, I think a lot of leftists also make this mistake. They make the mistake
that we need everybody. We don't need everybody.
Not just everybody, but they make the mistake that every working class person wants progress, which is just not true.
Not every working class person does. There are reactionary members of the working class. And it's something that we need to address, and it's not that we should.
It needs to be addressed, and it needs to be accepted as well.
Right.
But, that doesn't mean you don't. That doesn't mean you don't serve the people, but rather that you acknowledge that not everybody, is on your side, and that's okay.
Right. But by still serving them and still relaying to them compassion, you are bringing cause to your case, and that's what's important here. But the other thing is like I said, because of the demand for growth and also the growth of that growth, so the acceleration of it, even a small percentage of people, a few million, even a few 100,000, could do significant damage to the economy within a short period of time to make what would have been a productive quarter a very unproductive quarter, simply because of profit demands, and also because margins aren't as high as you think they are, because the wealthy take everything that they can to reduce those margins. So the actual what's going to happen here is it's going to cut into operating costs, and things are going to start breaking down, and then that's where the left makes its move in and starts replacing those systems out. And that's where you get things, for instance, like we saw with the Black Panther Party, where they would go into neighborhoods and do like free school breakfasts, and like the Women, Infants, and Children's program actually came about through the Black Panthers as well. And that's where we come in and we provide those services that the government hasn't been giving. And we create it ourselves, because the government has shown not only are they not able to do it, they're not willing to do it, even if they are able.
And it's the same in my country. They've been going out of their way to cut social services for the disabled. Our health services had its worst winter crisis since forever, with over a third of waiting lists being up to 4 hours in A&E. It's been a disaster, really. And again, it's a sign that, the conservative governments across the world, they do not care about the well-being of their citizens. And that is why the left itself must show people that we care. that we want to make a difference,
If
and
I
that
were
a difference can be made by doing something minor, something small,
if I were
something
to
that may seem
say
inconsequential,
anything
but has a greater
to
effect.
if I were to say anything to our UK listeners out there, the NHS is a very important resource, and you do not want to lose it. You do not want what we have in the United States. To put it into perspective, about 40,000 to 50,000, the number is actually kind of unknown. We don't know the exact number, but about 40,000 to 50,000 people die in the United States because they can't get proper health coverage because they cannot afford it. The system literally fails these people, and they die because of government neglect.
Precisely.
If this were
they don't call it murder, they don't call it murder, but it is murder.
But the thing is let's put this into perspective. And we talked about the Patriot Act in 9/11, and I hate to go back to 9/11. 3,000 people died on 9/11. I remember exactly where I was that day when it had happened. I was in high school. I was in Latin class. And I was told, turn on the TV. A plane just hit the World Trade Center. And by the end of the day, 3,000 people had died. That is 10 times less than the amount of people that die from lack of health care in the United States. If this were a terrorist attack, the United States government would be looking for a country full of brown people to invade. But because profits are on the line, people are allowed to die.
And this ties in very well, in fact, to what's been happening recently with Iran, which I'm sure a lot of people are aware of.
Yeah, we entered the new year with a new conflict, a new war, almost.
Almost.
Yeah,
almost.
We were almost. Well, we don't know yet.
Fucking nose hair.
Yeah, well,
we don't really know. Actually, that's the thing. We still don't really know. I mean, both sides, by the look of things, for now, are cooling down a bit, but it was not looking good.
It wasn't
this week.
Yeah, so an Iraqi militia went into a U.S. embassy, and the U.S. retaliated, and they retaliated in a manner that was unproportional by using a drone to kill the general of the Quds force in Iran, which is an act.
He was a very significant political leader within the country.
Yes, and also an act of war. The guy was on a peace mission in Iraq. Now, keep in mind, I don't like the guy. I'm not going to defend his record. He is a war criminal. However, two rights do not make a wrong, and this was not the time or the place to act in this manner.
No.
This was an unprovoked attack of unequal proportion to what had happened. And
precisely,
there were a lot of different things that the U.S. government could have done, but they didn't. Instead, they went this route. And Iran proportionally struck an Iraqi base that had U.S. troops stationed. Nobody died. In fact, it's actually thought Iran purposely struck the base when there were no U.S. troops there.
Essentially to send a message.
So we have two different levels in which the United States and Iran are playing at here in this very dangerous game. And all of this is coming on top of, and in the background, impeachment hearings, which were due to happen sometime this month. So it was very clear that the prime motivator here, or one of the prime motivators, was probably distraction. And this shows you how desperate our president is right now.
Especially when recent reports have revealed, for that matter, that this was actually an option on the table that has been talked about for quite some time now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it is. Several months at least. I think I saw, and you had mentioned to me, an article that said about 7 months. This information's actually new. We're still going through it. So if there's details here that are a little bit off, it's because new stuff has either been revealed or just we haven't been able to go through it. Like, it literally dropped right as we started recording, and I was like, oh, fuck. Got to go through this again. But, the thing is, news always happens. You got to do the show sometime, right? Otherwise, we'd always just be in production and never get anything done. So
the report essentially suggests that Trump himself authorized the killing of Soleimani 7 months ago. The assassination was authorized in June of 2019 and was subject to whether Iranian aggression resulted in the death of an American, supposedly. That was the excuse. It was a special way of essentially saying if they do something we don't like, or even touch something we own, then just kill a political leader of theirs. I mean, that was the whole idea.
Yeah, and it's quite the conspiracy, too, because it turns out that the directive was actually suggested by Eric Prince, who is the owner of the company formerly known as Blackwater, that is now operates out of the United Arab Emirates. And there was a bunch of collusion between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, too. So this looks like it is one huge shuffling of the political order in the Middle East. And of course, Putin has his fingers in it too. Really, at this point, it's kind of like who knows what the hell's going on with as complicated as things are.
But the important thing to note is it's the similarities between what we all saw in Iraq and the same mistakes being made again.
It very much
by the same people who don't want to admit that they want to defend war.
Oh God, yeah.
And yet
the parallels
repeat
are just
pro-war talking points.
Yeah, the parallels
Essentially,
are definitely there.
Same dehumanization.
Same dehumanization, same lying, same distortion of the facts and the truth that we saw. I mean, I remember Iraq. I was, let's see here, I'd been in high school because about 2003 is when we went to war. And I remember very clearly hearing the stories that, oh yeah, definitely weapons of destruction there. You know, Colin Powell even went up to the UN because he was so confident, had photos and everything of it. And Colin Powell apologized about
he apologized.
Yes. One of the few times that a U.S. official has ever apologized for something of that magnitude. I mean, that tells you just how big the lie was.
And it's part of a larger problem with American nationalism and the extremes it is taking at this rate. It deliberately ignores past mistakes and makes excuses for new mistakes. And the point of the matter is, regardless of what people say about Soleimani, assassinating a political leader in a foreign country is a stupid fucking idea. Like, I don't think any particular person...
Just remember that if you do go to war, if you are sent off there to Iraq, you'll come back, maybe with missing limbs, and you'll probably need health care. And it'll be health care.
Well, let's be fair, the ones advocating for it will not enlist. But
yeah, the ones that are advocating for it will not enlist. They always go for the poor.
All talk.
You know, it is. Pretty much all the people that I knew, like even like growing up in high school during the Iraq War that were pro-war, all had wealthy parents, and it wasn't them going off. It was people like me and my friends that were poor as fuck that would have to go because that was the only way that they could afford college or whatever if they didn't get a scholarship. If you weren't on that AB honor roll, you were in the Army, you were in the Navy, you were in the Air Force, whatever. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have a draft in this country anymore, because being poor is the draft. But, you know, they're saying that they might have to bring that back for Iran because that's a pretty big country, pretty big military. And, well, we've
one of the largest in the world, actually.
We've ran the simulations, by the way, and they're not good for the United States. Go Google Operation Millennium Challenge. Very interesting thing. Let's just say a few speedboats and some boys on motorcycles make pretty good do of the U.S. military.
And the point of the matter is, again, regardless of what people think of certain individuals, the people of Iran do not approve of countries going into their own and bombing their own political leaders. I mean, they've constantly said, not just the people of Iran, but the people of Iraq as well, have constantly said that they don't want the US in their country anymore. But the US doesn't give a shit because, again, it's all about the oil. I mean, Trump himself even fucking said he went back to Syria and he got the oil. Like you couldn't ask for more honesty if you actually tried. That's what I find hilarious.
Hey, one thing I do have to say about Trump, when it comes to honesty of goals, he tells you why. And he says the quiet part's loud. He says all the stuff that you weren't supposed to say. And he exposes it all for everybody. And it shows you how far the Republican Party and their supporters are willing to go, because they're willing to defend it at this point because they don't care.
No.
They think that they're untouchable. One of the big dangers, and getting back to what we were talking about earlier, this plan for a new movement. If we go through this, one of the things that we're going to probably be facing might be a draft at that point in the country. But if there's a draft, historically, there's probably going to be laws about speaking out against the government that are put in place. You might be arrested for doing any of this stuff, for advocating a new system. Because like we said earlier, Espionage Act of 1917/18, they went after people that were committing sedition, if you will, that wanted to replace the capitalism and the United States government with something else. We've seen brutal crackdowns on free speech. I forgot to mention earlier Kent State, where the Kentucky National Guard straight up murdered peace activists, unarmed student peace activists, and just shot them point blank. So this is not ahistorical. It's not conspiratorial bullshit. It's not paranoid rants.
This is the truth. Like, the United States has always been
right
the biggest terrorists that the world has ever seen. Like, this is the whole point.
Right. And the thing is that should a movement arise, we need to be prepared for the retaliation, because when the United States gets desperate, it gets desperate. And if Trump starts a war to secure his power, things are going to get bad, and things are going to get bad fast.
And this is why I also think that, an anti-war movement is also needed, which is something I don't believe that you may have mentioned, but I do think
definitely
the anti-war movement
needs
to get, we need a strong anti-war movement as well, because honestly, folks, they will continue to tell you, especially over social media, all of the Trumpites will continue to tell you that the American people want a war because it's another quote unquote preventative war, like the famous last words, basically, because that's what every war has basically been, at least the ones the United States have defended. The majority of American people, according to a recent Ipsos poll, found that 56% of all Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the situation over there. So for people to constantly suggest that this is what people want, that people want another useless war to send people off to get their limbs blown off or to get killed even, and not only that, but to cause innocent people in another country to suffer under the boot of imperialism once again, do not fall for the same lies, because it's the same shit. It's the same tactics. It's the same manufactured consent. The media have been pouring over Iran for the past few days now, constantly, not just in America, in the UK as well. Our own fucking blonde prick essentially has essentially accused the opposition, who, and Jeremy Corbyn's been great, honestly, even after the disastrous election. He's been putting up with so much shit from the media that, I can't honestly believe how, that whole thing is another topic entirely. The BBC are very much to blame for the UK election, especially the lack of impartiality, the constant demonization of the Labour Party over the past while, Brexit itself, of course, a lot of different things. But our own PM has essentially called Jeremy Corbyn a quote-unquote terrorist sympathizer for suggesting a diplomatic solution to a war that should not fucking happen. Because this is the point. Warmongers do not want you to believe that a diplomatic solution is possible under any of these circumstances, because the truth of the matter is they want to see more bloodshed, because that's all they see.
Well, the establishment doesn't want you to believe that there's an alternative for anything, whether it's a war with Iran or whether it's capitalism as a whole. They don't want you to see the alternative.
This is the point. We can't fall for the same tricks again, and some people still do, and it's hard, of course, to understand when you don't look back on some of the tricks you might have fallen for. But I honestly implore people who genuinely still believe that it's a good idea to invade another Middle Eastern country even though the US continues to wreak havoc across the entire world, for that matter. Let's not even. I don't even think we mentioned actually that one of the bases Iran actually bombed were one of the major torture sites, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh yeah, no, I forgot about that little detail, but that is correct. Yeah, it was.
And the point is, we have to stop demonizing other countries because they retaliate on other countries' aggression. This is the point. Comparing the vandalism of an embassy to murdering a political leader is idiotic. And I know conservatives will continue to screech and defend such acts of aggression all they want, but that doesn't hide the truth of the matter. You can sit there and moan about it all you want, but you're still defending another unjustified war. And the majority of people don't want that shit. And that's why an anti-war movement is necessary to prevent more of such events from happening.
So as we wrap up here, I do want to wrap up on a bit of a positive note here. And I wanted to give a shout out to our man, our boy, Diego from Galapagos.
With a fiery libido.
Oh yes, this tortoise. Let me tell you about it. So he helped bring his species back from like 15 tortoises to like a population of over 2,000, and he fathered over 40%. He fathered over 40% of the new population. So I'm just saying, you want to talk about bringing sexy back? Move over Justin Timberlake. There's a new guy in town, and he has a lot of turtleneck apparently.
Look, even looking at this photo, he just looks exhausted.
He looks exhausted and happy, and he's probably gonna have even more turtle sex in retirement too. I mean, I don't think that ever stops being a thing with those guys. I mean, could ask, but he'd probably just like try to fuck us or something.
Please, no, I don't want to think about that. Not you don't want to.
You don't want to. But yeah, so
turtles are not my thing.
It is something like we do joke, but like it is something serious that he did help bring his species back from the brink of extinction. He was a giant Galapagos sea tortoise, and that's pretty much the gist of it. So good news. I guess the cherry on top of the shit sundae, if you will.
Oh, it really is, but I guess it's a good analogy in a way because it highlights the importance of small steps.
Small steps. And also, it's just one more thing reminding us that we're all getting fucked, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where I was going that, but if you do like our podcast and you want to support us, like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell if you're on YouTube. Woo! All that good stuff.
Unless they censor us, which they probably will.
Yeah, and just spread our content around. Give us a share. Tell a friend about us. Everything helps. We do have a Patreon at Enceladus1. We're also at Enceladus1 on Twitter. And I am at JZZVID, which does kind of look like Jizvid now that I think about it. And we Moonpaw, what's your handle?
I believe it's Dark Dewuski at Snouts Online.
Oh yes, yeah, you do have a Snouts, and also I think that's your Twitter too, isn't it? Which
no, my Twitter is Dark Dewulfe.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because I'm cool.
So cool. Well. That'll be it for tonight. We will see you all next week. Good luck and solidarity.
Solidarity.